Religion and atheism have been central to human history, shaping not only individual beliefs but also cultures, laws, political systems, and moral frameworks. Across the globe, people look to religion for answers for life's deepest questions. Why are we here? What happens after death? What is the purpose of suffering? At the same time, others turn to science, philosophy, and critical reasoning to form a worldview grounded in observable evidence rather than spiritual doctrine. In the Western Hemisphere, monotheistic religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam dominate the cultural landscape, providing moral codes, historical narratives, and cultural identity. In contrast, Eastern religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism often emphasize cycles of life, spiritual enlightenment, and harmony with the natural world rather than a singular deity. Understanding these belief systems and the arguments both for and against them requires a careful examination of philosophy, scientific theories, and historical evidence. It also requires acknowledging the profound impact that belief or disbelief can have on human behavior, society, and personal experience. One of the most commonly cited arguments in favor of religion is the no atheist in foxholes concept, popularized during the 20th century. The idea suggests that when people face extreme danger, death, or trauma, they instinctively turn to faith for comfort and hope. The argument is often used to claim that religion fulfills a deep psychological and emotional need that is universal amongst humans. Proponents suggest that even individuals who reject faith in everyday life may seek spiritual solace when confronted with mortality, demonstrating that belief in a higher power is not merely a cultural artifact but an innate human inclination. Critics, however, point out that turning to religion in times of crisis does not prove the existence of a deity. Psychological studies suggest that humans naturally seek patterns, meaning, and reassurance when confronted with uncertainty or danger, and that the brain emits large amounts of DMT right before it's going to die, causing hallucinations. From this perspective, the foxhole argument reflects human psychology rather than metaphysical reality, illustrating how belief can serve functional or emotional purposes without validating supernatural claims. Scientific approaches to understanding existence provide alternative explanations for the universe's origins. The Big Bang Theory, currently the prevailing cosmological model, suggests that approximately 13.8 billion years ago, the universe expanded from a singularity, a point of infinite density and energy. This expansion led to the formation of galaxies, stars, and planetary systems. Atheists often cite cosmology as evidence that the universe can be explained through natural laws and processes, without requiring divine intervention. From this perspective, scientific inquiry offers explanation for how the universe exists, independent of theological claims. Religious perspectives, however, argue that even if science can describe how the universe functions, it cannot answer the ultimate question of why the universe exists in the first place. Many theists contend that the existence of the cosmos points to a first cause, a necessary being or creator who initiated existence. Philosophical arguments, such as the cosmological argument, assert that an infinite regress of causes is logically problematic, thereby implying the necessity of a transcendent origin. For believers, this metaphysical reasoning leaves space for faith, complementing scientific explanations rather than contradicting them. In the field of biology, evolutionary theory has become a central framework for explaining the complexity of life. Argue that natural selection can account for intricate biological structures without invoking a designer. Dawkins emphasizes that evolution is not guided by purpose. Instead, genes propagate traits that confer survival advantages, producing organisms that appear exquisitely designed over time. This perspective challenges traditional notions of intelligent design, suggesting that complexity can emerge from cumulative, non-direct processes over millions of years. However, proponents of creationism and intelligent design argue that certain biological structures are incredibly complex, meaning they could not function if even a single component were missing. Examples often cited include the bacterial flagellum or the human eye. From this viewpoint, the probability that such a system could arise purely through random mutations and natural selection seems implausibly low, indicating the possibility of deliberate design. This debate underscores the tension between scientific explanation of natural processes and theological interpretations of life's origins. The emergence of life itself is another key area of discussion. The primordial soup hypothesis suggests that life began from a mixture of organic molecules in Earth's early oceans, energized by sources such as lightning or geothermal heat. These molecules could have formed self-replicating RNA strands, eventually giving rise to more complex cells. While gaps remain in understanding the exact mechanisms, This model demonstrates that natural processes could, in principle, account for the origins of life. Many atheists cite this as evidence that life's complexity does not require supernatural explanation. Religious thinkers often counter that while chemistry and biology explain mechanisms, they do not address the ultimate purpose. From a faith perspective, the precise conditions and timing necessary for life might suggest intentionality. For many believers, even if life emerged through natural processes, the existence of consciousness, morality, and human experience points to a higher order or spiritual significance beyond mere chemical interactions. Fossil records provide robust evidence for the long history of life on Earth, including the evolution of species and the existence of dinosaurs millions of years ago. Paleontology, combined with radiometric dating, demonstrates a gradual development of life, which contrasts sharply with literal interpretations of creationist narratives, such as Noah's Ark or a six-day creation. Fossils, geological strata, and evolutionary patterns collectively challenge a strict reading of religious texts while supporting a scientific framework for understanding life's history. Creationist perspectives often respond by interpreting religious texts metaphorically rather than literally. Some propose that events such as the Great Flood were localized or symbolic, conveying moral or spiritual truths rather than precise historical accounts. Others attempt to reconcile scientific findings with scriptures through theistic evolution, arguing that divine guidance may operate through natural processes. This approach illustrates that faith and empirical observations are not necessarily mutually exclusive, allowing believers to engage with science while maintaining spiritual conviction. Eastern religions provide yet another perspective on existence and morality. Hinduism, for instance, emphasizes cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara, and seek liberation, moksha, for these cycles. Ethical living, meditation, and spiritual practice are prioritized over historical accuracy or dogma. Life is viewed as a larger cosmic rhythm, and spiritual enlightenment is the ultimate goal. This framework demonstrates that religious meaning can exist independently of belief in a singular, personal deity. Buddhism, while emerging from the Hindu tradition, often rejects the concept of a creator god entirely. Instead, it focuses on mindfulness, ethical conduct, and the cessation of suffering through enlightenment. The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path offer practical guidance for ethical and spiritual living, emphasizing personal responsibility and insight rather than divine command. This approach challenges the Western assumption that religion necessarily requires belief in God, showing that spiritual systems can address morality, purpose, and suffering without theistic foundations. Monotheistic religions in the Western Hemisphere, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, argue that moral frameworks do not require divine authority. Furthermore, some critics focus on instances where religious doctrines have been used to justify intolerance, discrimination, or violence, raising questions about the relationship between belief and ethical behavior. Claims. Historical evidence for figures such as Jesus is often cited in debates about the validity of religious claims. While many scholars agree that Jesus likely existed as a historical figure, the supernatural claims surrounding his life, including miracles and resurrection, remains matters of faith. The distinction between historical evidence and theological interpretation illustrates the complexity of evaluating religious claims from both historical and empirical perspectives. Atheists often point to the lack of empirical evidence for miracles, divine intervention, or supernatural phenomenon as reasons to reject religious claims. They argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which historical and scientific inquiry cannot verify. For these skeptics, faith alone is insufficient justification for beliefs and claims that contradict observable reality. Religious believers, however, argue that faith represents a different form of knowledge. Personal experience, spiritual insight, and communal testimony provide evidence for many individuals, even if such evidence cannot be measured scientifically. From this perspective, the limitations of empirical verification do not invalidate spiritual truths. Rather, they highlight that some aspects of human experience may lie beyond the scope of conventional scientific methods. Another philosophical argument against the existence of a benevolent deity is the problem of suffering. If an omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect God exists, why do pain, injustice, and natural disasters occur? This question challenges traditional theological conceptions of divine goodness and presents one of the strongest moral arguments for atheism. Religious traditions offer counterarguments to the problem of suffering. Christianity, for example, frames suffering as a consequence of free will or as a test of faith. Hinduism and Buddhism interpret suffering through karma and the impermanence of life. These explanations aim to reconcile human experience with spiritual beliefs, suggesting that suffering can carry meaning, opportunity for growth, or spiritual lessons. While atheists may find these justifications unconvincing, they illustrate how religions attempt to integrate the reality of pain into a coherent worldview. Western monotheism, or Eastern spiritual traditions, raises profound questions about existence, morality, and human purpose. Science provides naturalistic explanations for the universe, the emergence of life, and evolutionary history, while religion addresses questions of meaning, ethics, and spiritual fulfillment. Arguments for and against belief engage with psychology, philosophy, history, and empirical evidence. By examining these perspectives openly and critically, individuals can navigate their own worldview with curiosity, empathy, and awareness, appreciating both the explanatory power of science and the existential guidance that religion can provide.